What I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is giving an overview of our undergraduate populations, how we compare ourselves over time as well as with other AAU institutions in terms of our diversity, but also our student success rates, that would be retention and graduation rates. But then I'll go into our graduate student demographics and how those relate in our national picture among AAUs and where we are situated there and how we've changed over time, and then touch on our faculty and staff demographics, hopefully to give you a grounding and context for the discussions that will be coming later today. So institutional research, for those of you who are not familiar with our office, we perform research analysis and reporting that supports campus academic planning, strategic decision-making, enrollment management, and program assessment. We are not the Office of Research that helps you get grants, for those of you who might be researchers, but we do more support decision-making for the administration on campus. In summary, this comes off a t-shirt that we can buy. We do precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. We are only as good as our data is accessible and we can get to, but my colleagues have a dry sense of humor. So, as any of you who have been on campus for the last few years, you've noticed our undergraduate enrollment growth rate. We've pretty much jumped over the 25,000 mark and the 27,000 mark in the last 2 years, just kind of missed a whole 1,000 series there, which that is looks scary, but the plans are for us not to grow much more than this and actually decrease in our undergrad size. There was a lot of political pressures for us to increase rapidly undergraduate enrollments. Now we're letting those kind of flow through and have still a large undergrad enrollment numbers, but much less so than the last couple of years. But in that change, we've also seen rapidly a changing demographic of our undergrad student population. In this case, these are the numbers of by ethnicity of different populations, but if I show it by percentages, you can see where we've gone from almost half of our students being of the Asian ethnicity to under 40% now, with a larger growth of Hispanic student populations and a noticeable number of international students at 16%. But this is not to be unexpected here in California, where again I've highlighted the traditional college age for undergrads. They're in the mix, but in the next coming decades in the state, our Hispanic population is estimated to be near 50% by the 2060 time period. And if we focus in on our main feeder counties in this area, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego, it gets near 60% come the 2060 timeframe. So these having a larger growth in our Hispanic population is par for the course if we are to serve our mission as a public institution. But where does that place us when we look at our cohort of AAU institutions? In this case, the red bars are public AAUs, the green bars are private AAUs. There's 60 AAU institutions in the mix. If we look at it as a percentage of underrepresented minority enrollments, which would be American Indian, Black, and Hispanic, we are third in the nation among AAUs in terms of our proportion. And we are very close with our sister UC institutions in UC Santa Barbara and UCLA near us as well. In terms of a percentage of what we were a few years ago, you can see we've made a major jump from just those past few years where we were at 18%. So we've added almost a 10% amount there in the last few years. And our new freshmen, so those were our total undergrad enrollments, but who we are bringing on as our full-time, first-time new freshmen those percentages are rather high as well and place us among the top of the AAUs as well. And if we look at it in terms of total minority enrollments, which would include the Asian population, we are a leader among AAUs at nearly 70%, but we've always been that if we include the Asians ethnicities, because nationally, my decades at the University of Kansas, we would look at minority enrollments, and that would include the Asian population. And so whenever other institutions are looking at the national scene, they might be seeing us as a leader, and I just wanted you guys all to be aware of that. But for our location here, it's really the underrepresented minority enrollments that we look as being a major indicator of progress for inclusiveness. But it's not just ethnic minorities where we've also seen a major change. It's been in what the other circumstances, the socioeconomic circumstances. So those students receiving Pell Grants, we have the highest proportion among the AAUs, and you can see most of the UCs are there at the top. And this was the most recent data available on 2013 enrollments. And if you look at it in terms of first-time, full-time freshmen this particular year, we were easily 10% above our next AAU competitor in our student population we were bringing in that year in terms of low income. Well, low income and underrepresented minority status have impacts on the ability for students to graduate and go through at a timely manner in terms of student success measures. For instance, the gap, what is called the achievement gap measures for underrepresented versus the non-URM students runs about 5% for second-year retention, let's call it 15% for four-year graduation rates, and just over 10% for six-year graduation rates. Usually we're under 10%, but that fall 2010, if you can just follow the cohort years, you can see some years have a student cohort going through that may have be less academically prepared than other years. When that was our trends over time, trends compared to other AAU publics in particular, second-year rates, we are usually perform better than our public AAU peers. In terms of URM, we're about almost 3% better. In terms of non-URM, that's almost 4%. And in terms of our ability for second-year retention rates, four-year graduation rates is really where we shine in many cases relative to our peer public AAU institutions, where our URM population graduates at almost 10% higher rates than our AAU public peers, and that carries forward with our non-URM populations as well, but at a higher tick rate. For the six-year graduation rates, making sure that what's called the 150% time to graduation, which the federal government will often use as a key success measure, you can see that, again, we maintain our percentage above our AAU public peers, but you can see it also they're catching up in many ways, especially among the URM populations relative to our rates. Now, putting these things together and what makes us stand out, here UCI is the red bubble there, and the other yellow ones are other UC AAU peers, is that our percentage of undergraduates who receive Pell Grants contrasted with our, in this case, six-year graduation rates. The size of the bubble is the number of, in this case, Pell undergrads receiving that each campus has. You can see how the UCs in particular stand out in almost a quadrant of their own relative to other AAU publics and the AAU privates, which have a much higher success rate but much smaller number of students who are low income. And that is very similar for the four-year graduation rates as well. Again, our number of students who are receiving Pell Grants for us puts us at a higher category than our UC sister institutions who are AAU peers. That would exclude Riverside and Merced. First generation enrollments for us very similar in terms as relative to the low income as well. You can see that we again stand out from our sister institutions, and our sister institutions and us stand out from the rest of the AAU publics with success rates there and with four-year graduation rate levels as well. So we do better than our AAU public peers, and why we are not sure. We have kind of several theories, but we are kind of needing to explore what that UCI magic might be so we can continue to improve on it. And I think a lot of discussions are going on in Michael Denon's area around that to help make sure at-risk populations are getting the help they need. Because here's how kind of part of the reasons why is what I'm showing here is the dark blue line is the percentage of underrepresented minority students on campus. So we're just near 30% there. But if a student is URM and first generation, that's the red line. So again, it follows a very similar pattern, slightly different, but still easily above 20%. And then if you throw in low income, and then low income and first generation and URM, you can see that, again, these populations have been really coming into our student body population starting around 2010 at a much higher rate than they had in the past. Well, what these things mean in terms of something like student success factors, you can see here in second year retention rates. In this case, the UCI overall second-year retention rate is the dark blue line up there. And, and one thing just to point out, this is data that, the 2016 student cohort, we did very well there in terms of closing the gaps, especially for the URM and the URM combination things. Those second-year retention rates all kind of fall together, and so there were some major efforts and monies that we received as a campus on that particular year that we were able to put forward on some things and start some major improvements in our second-year retention rates that year. But those same four-year graduation rates, you can see this is where the gap is partly the biggest between the UCI overall rates versus the URM and the URM combination populations, and the six-year graduation rates as well. The gap closes, but it's still there. But what main thing with these slides is to say, when you start stacking issue upon issue on a given student, those combination of issues cause harder students to be successful going through. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that our plan is, again, this is our plan. We'll see if the state lets us. But our plan was to decline our student enrollments slightly in the coming years and increase our graduate enrollments to make our graduate enrollments a larger proportion of our overall enrollments. So let's look at our graduate enrollments and how our diversity there compares with AAU peers. So in this case, we're looking at underrepresented minority graduate enrollments that include all degree levels, first professional, law, medicine, master's levels, and PhD levels. Here you can see it's not like our undergrad proportions, but it is improving. In this case, we're at about 13% 2016, but in 2010, we were at 10% and further down the line of our AAU peer institutions. In terms of if you include the Asian ethnic group, so all minority groups, the relative picture stays the same. Although we become top in the top 5 of the nation at that point, including the Asian populations, and that's probably not too unexpected. Our international population, we're right in the middle relative to our AAU institutions, so we're not doing too much there in terms of too many or too few, I suppose. I guess one of the issues for us might be our female graduate enrollments, where although they make up in the 40% round, 45% in this case, we are in the bottom quartile near there in terms of the overall mixture of female graduate students in our population. So that included all degree levels. Quickly going on to the PhD pool of students, and this is going to be PhD degrees we're granting. So in terms of the number of minority degrees being granted, they're underrepresented minorities. Among the AAUs, you can see there's only one institution that is graduating over 100, and the sheer number for us is just under 50 this particular year, and that's kind of placing us in the upper middle area of the peer group. When you consider proportionally, though, because we are relatively small in our PhD class sizes going through, that number pushes up in the top 5 among AAUs. And that's a substantial change from just a few years ago in terms of the proportions, where in 2011, our proportion and where we're at put us more in the middle of the AAU mix. And the sheer number at that point a few years ago, where we were probably in the mid to low 30s in terms of our underrepresented minority students going through. Where we have a high proportion of underrepresented PhDs going through, biological and biomedical science disciplines, we have a high proportion relative to AAU peers, but that number, that high proportion, represents just over 15 students. And so when you think about your recruitment, and if you're going to be recruiting from looking for a minority hire, assistant professor hire, coming from a large research university, this is kind of your pool of numbers you have to work with. And for physical sciences, again, we're near the top, among the top 10 there in terms of proportions, although that proportion is, probably less than 7%. And that sheer number of proportions puts us all of 6 students. And, you can see under 10, underrepresented, is about the most there for physical science disciplines. And social science disciplines, similarly, we are near the top there. And number-wise, it's a bit more, but still you can see the magnitude of what the population pools are like out there. So in terms of gender diversity of our PA students, we do lag behind our peers. Here we see that we're running about the bottom quartile of PhDs going to women. But that, in terms of numbers, you can see it's actually was slightly higher in the rank pool than the overall, our percentage, but again, there's some very small private institutions in the mix. In terms of where we do well for women PhD graduates, business was one that jumped out for us, but that high jump, amounted to 5 PhDs going out. And so that's kind of the mix of the PhD populations going through the AAU pipeline. So in terms of our faculty diversity and where we stand relative to AAU peers, if you include, think about it in minority, all minority terms, and include Asian ethnicities, we are pretty diverse, and that puts us up there. And that kind of falls along the ranks as well. We're in the top 5 for assistant professor ranks, in near the top 10 for associate professor ranks, and for full professor ranks in the top. But again, that includes the Asian ethnicities if we focus just on the URM ethnicities, we're in the top 10 for our ladder ranks, but UCLA is number 1, UC Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara are ahead of us, and UC San Diego's right on us. Assistant professors, again, we are 6th among AAUs. In terms of associate professors, we're 10th, and 12th for the full professor rank at 7%. We have improved slightly from where we were just a few years ago when we ranked 13th among the AAUs there in 2012. And in looking at the ranks just a few years ago, what we were polling for our assistant professors was quite on the low end. But otherwise, we seem to, this is interesting, Caltech they probably have very few associate professors, and anyway, that percentage jumps out there. But we have improved from where we were just a few years ago, and in the case of full professors a few years ago with the same percentage, we had a better rank among AAU. So actually, our 7% rank for full professors for underrepresented tenure track faculty, we're at that same level. Other institutions have just come ahead of us in the past few years. So in terms of gender diversity, we are in the top 15 with our proportion of ladder rank faculty women among AAUs, and have a better percentage in our lower ranks. You can see 46% for assistants, 45% for associates, but when you look at the full professor rank, we are 11th, but that's under 30% of our mix of female full professors. And which is interesting is that 43% is a very similar, again, a few years ago, our assistant professor ranks is where we've made some improvements in the past few years. Otherwise, we've kind of stayed in the similar locations of our other ranked faculty groups. And so our international faculty percentage, and again, international faculty would be international until they can get permanent residency. So it's a small percentage and stays that way probably because we're looking at citizenship of the current pool, but we're about middle of the range there for AAU institutions. And our final kind of slide here is what does it look like for the non-instructional staff? And so this, I didn't want to go through all the different categories and all these different institutions. So what you see here is the different occupational categories that IPEDS collects our staff on, our types of staff. And UCI is that gold circle. And so about half of these occupations were above the top of the blue bar, which is the 75th percentile. And so in half the occupational cases, we are in the top quartile for underrepresented minority staff numbers. And, that's the one thing that stood out to me is that we are high in terms of in the top 25th percentile for the management levels and in a few of the other levels, but places where we're not, the research, we're right in the mix there of the research occupations, and then the libraries were in the middle as well. So in summary, there are a few places where we can be proud of as an institution about our impact on the lives of our students, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds, but clearly that we have some room to improve on the training of the next generation of URM and women faculty for the nation, as well as making sure our own faculty are representative of our student populations. These slides will be made available. So we went through them quickly, but you'll be able to access them after the institute. Any questions?
Thanks, Ryan. That's actually a very inspiring kind of set of numbers insofar as we're always on this end of the grid. But I also was cognizant that the comparison is always to AAUs. And over the years, of course, we hire many people that are in research-intensive universities that aren't in the AAUs, but obviously moving into it. And I wonder how we look when you expand the comparison. Have you ever seen any data when you compare compare us to, let's say, research-intensive R1 non-AAUs as a kind of different comparison, and how do we look?
Well,
when you broaden the frame of it?
yeah, so if we, once you broaden the frame, our relative possession would change, of course. We haven't done that delving yet, but that is something that we can do, or get a bigger national picture for the other Carnegie classification types that we might want to compare down the road. Just at one level, we do have. Again, I have spent too many decades at the University of Kansas, and so, that gives me a certain framework which is so different here than the population at California. And so it really is, this state in particular is so diverse, and we have so many opportunities for diversity that it really is, where we lead, we also lag, because when you look at what the population is, we could be doing better. So, and my guess is that yes, we would not be in the same relative positions if we included lower level R1s. Yes.
Privilege as chair. Could you sort of give us some takeaways regarding the data about staff?
So. This was actually my first time even to look at the staff data, and it's a collection that IPEDS does on the HR metrics of, so that was full-time employees, it excluded part-time employees. I just wanted to look for what would be the most core type of staff, and I, I think there are what you look for would be areas where we might do better. And as it would be, when I looked at the management level, I thought, oh, we're in the top quartile for underrepresented minorities. But we should, for our population mix here, I guess you would think that you would want to do better than that. And we're getting there. And that even at the top quartile, that percentage is relatively low. I mean, if I went back to that. Yeah. And so on the management level, it's under 20%. And even that puts us high, but also tells us where on the national scene we are in terms of underrepresented ethnicities at management level positions.
And this includes both men and women?
Yes, yes. Yes, we can break this out at gender, but again, we had 30 minutes.
So about 40 slides ago, there was this weird little blip, and I don't even know if I can remember the exact data point, but like in 2005, 2006, the underrepresented minorities actually did better than the whole cohort in terms of, I believe it was second year.
Yes.
And is there enough institutional memory to go back that far to figure out what happened that year?
So small numbers. So we had very small proportions of underrepresented students, and we also had a different admissions criteria going on. And so the number of students we brought on, they may be underrepresented, but they were probably high academically achieving and small numbers. And as we added more of the underrepresented minorities undergrads in the mix, you see, whenever you see the lines go like that, it's usually small numbers until we get to add additional numbers. Yes.
So this is just something we put on the table for our conversations throughout the day. One of the things that I take away from this is what you said, is that we're doing quite well, but we can do better, right? And so I think one of the things I'm thinking about is making the case in faculty hiring. We're making the case when you look at this data, we would say we're doing well, therefore, we don't need to worry so much, right? On the other hand, we're doing well, and we should be thinking hard about how to do better.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I'm just thinking about for our conversations how we can be attentive to that when we're talking about inclusive excellence in our different aspects of our work.
And I would also say that doing well among a wide population of AAU institutions across the nation is one thing. Doing well within our own geographical basin might be where we might focus some things on. Thank you.